the end of that line. I think we have about, to talk about the state of the park, or of Yellowstone National Park in 10 minutes is a daunting task. So I'm not going to talk about the state of the park overall. I'll just focus on a couple things that I think are crucial to what's going on. And let's talk about people and money. You know, Yellowstone experienced, as many parks last year, the highest level of visitation in our history. It was a small increase for a one-year total of just under 4%, but it represents about a 21% increase over a two-year period of time. And that's a sort of astounding in its own right, in that the recreational visitors we have are about 4.26 million visitors. But the bigger astounding number in that right now is that over the same two-year period, bus traffic has increased 46%. And bus traffic puts a lot of different kinds of strain on the infrastructure of the park and the demands that we have to meet. But we're trying to do that. And we're trying to do that in a lot of ways. And I think that's what I'd like to talk about is that obviously the northwest corner of the state of Wyoming and southwest of Montana and the eastern side of Idaho is a destination location. And it's a destination location for an increasing number of visitors. And a lot of people are trying to tell us that visitation is going to go down. You know, that there was a lot of attention to national parks, that the centennial year brought a lot more focus. I'm not sure if I believe that and agree with that. Because if you look at 100 years of history, we've had, you know, increases and decreases, but generally, not generally, and always, the trend is up. We're up by basically 100% from where we were 50 years ago. And so the question is, what do we do? And so we've been in the communities that are surrounding Yellowstone National Park. We've not been in Jackson, but we've been in Cody, we've been in Gardner, we've been in West Yellowstone, talking about what the impacts are, not just to Yellowstone National Park, but what are the impacts to those communities? What can we be doing together? And I think we need, and we have a responsibility to be here as well, but what can and should we be doing in order to meet what we see as an increasing demand? One of the reasons I think that it's going to increase in this corner of Wyoming is because, and in this ecosystem, is most of you probably are aware of the National Geographic issue last year that was on the Yellowstone ecosystem. That really came out far too late to have an impact on, I think, last year's visitation. I think that's going to impact next year's visitation. So I think we have reason to be concerned about how we're going to handle the number of visitors. We started this interaction with a social science program with our own employees, with the local communities, and we made significant changes between 2015 and 2016 that even though we had an additional increase in visitation, it felt better. I mean, we didn't have the 2 to 3 hour delays at entrances to Yellowstone National Park. We didn't have some of the kinds of problems that we were experiencing before with foreign travel who we had made many outreaches to, and we didn't have the, you know, some of the problems with some of the congestion within the park because we took proactive actions between 15 and 16. And we're continuing to do that this year because we think there's a strong chance, as long as gas prices stay down, visitation will continue to increase in the short term. So it's on our minds. I think it's on your minds as well. Private land is a commodity surrounding Yellowstone National Park in terms of how do people build more infrastructure to handle the loads. We're at a point where I think we're seeing demand pricing in this ecosystem. Demand pricing, I assume you know what I mean, but you know, hotels and motels continue to raise their rates far outside of what would be a CPI for the area. I'm not casting any aspersions. You're businessmen and women and you're doing what you need to do, but that also has a corresponding increase in the cost of doing business within Yellowstone National Park. And so it's something that we're dealing with, and something that we're having to deal with also is people who are finding that a one-bedroom hotel room within the boundaries of Yellowstone National Park, that the minimum price you can get for that on a summer evening is close to $200 or over $200 a night. And so the question is, what do you do, and how does that whole thing interact with local communities? Because it's hard because of the amount of public land and the lack of private land surrounding the communities. How do you take the pressure off? And how does someone have an economic opportunity if they were to build facilities in the small communities of West Yellowstone or Gardner to actually be able to make a profit with the cost of construction, et cetera, et cetera? You know the drill. So it is a big deal. I would also just say, inside of the park, I hope some of you have seen what I consider incredible improvements we've made in the park. We have 400 new lodging units and new lodges at the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. We have we reverted employee cabins in Mammoth and Old Faithful back to visitor use. We're building new employee dorms to take the pressure off so we can have the people in that can actually take care of our visitors when we're there. The biggest problem we have with increasing National Park Service staff is we don't have the housing to put them in. And we have, just in Yellowstone National Park, this isn't a complaint, this is just facts. Just in Yellowstone National Park, we have a $65 million need for employee housing. We have about 562 employee housing units. 110 of them are functionally obsolete. And every year, we have employees who come in, they live in them for a while, they call OSHA, and we condemn a few more. I'm personally ashamed of the kind of accommodations we have to provide, or that we can provide for our employees. So we are making a concerted effort. You know, some of you may have listened to Representative Zinke, or the Secretary-elect's, or the President-elect's nominee for the Secretary. He talked about up to a $12.5 billion infrastructure program. We're certainly hopeful that between employee housing and roads and improvements we need to be made, we hope that's successful, and we hope that some kind of a program happens and we can take advantage of it to provide better services to our visitors. In the short time I have left, let me just talk dollars. Yellowstone National Park has one of the larger budgets for a park area within the system. Our budget out of operations of National Park System, which is basically operations dollars, is about $36 million. Last year it cost $91 million for us to operate Yellowstone National Park. That delta is made up by roads projects and donations and earned revenue through entrance fees and fish fees and recovery of fees for water, wastewater, etc. And if you add the concessioners' expenditures in that, Yellowstone expends about $120 million a year to operate and to improve Yellowstone National Park. We don't see any bright light on the horizon that says we can expect our operating dollars to increase through a government appropriation anytime soon. Once again, not a complaint. We all understand the fiscal situation for our country, but we have to work on earned revenue. We have to work on figuring out how we can increase the revenue to Yellowstone National Park from visitors who come to the park through fees that we charge. They're never popular, but it's still one of the best deals anywhere when you can visit either Yellowstone or Grand Teton for $30 for a carload for 7 days, or you can visit both parks, I think it's for $50 for 7 days. It's still a damn good bargain. You know, we would love to see, and we're limited. Please understand, we're limited by what we can charge. We can't do demand pricing. We could probably lower it in off seasons to try to get people to travel in the off seasons, but when you have 991,000 visitors, recreation visitors in the month of July, that's not going to go down a lot. That's when people can travel. So we look at revenue, we look at budgets, we're trying to look at what we can do best to provide the services that I think you all want us to provide. And the question is coming into being is, what else are we going to do? Do we have to look at limits in numbers of people who are visiting the park? Do we have to work on a reservation system? What can we do with mass transportation? What's the cost of mass transportation? Who's going to pay for it? And those are all issues that we're taking on right now. We actually are working with one of the best transportation companies in the world to look at that. We're also looking at congestion items such as at Old Faithful and Canyon where there's concentrations of visitors to see how we can moderate or pulse the impact of people who are coming in. We're trying, but it's hard. The last thing I would say is what we learned in winter use is that unless we have the science, unless we have the knowledge, unless we have, if you will, the proof about what the impacts of visitors, numbers of visitors are on visitor experience, unless we have the proof in terms of impacts or negative impacts of numbers of visitors or vehicles on the resource, we'll never be successful in selecting what's the right solution, what's the right way to go. So we've been at it for about 2 years trying to get the understanding, and hopefully we will come forward with programs that will be based on best available science and visitor experience. I have one more thing, and it's, we have a lot of problems in Yellowstone with visitor behavior. I'm sure you have them in Grand Teton as well. They were well documented last year in terms of people putting bison in the back of a car because they thought it was cold, or we had people who fell into hot pots and were never recovered because they were literally the acidic condition of the hot pot and the heat. There was nothing to recover. We had situations where people are off boardwalk, they're petting animals, they're approaching animals too quickly. Part of our social study program told me something I never knew, and I was surprised by. I thought people just didn't know. I thought people didn't get the message that they weren't supposed to get more closer than 25 yards away from a bison or an elk or a deer, or they were not supposed to be closer than 100 yards from a wolf or a grizzly bear. What I found out, because we would see people do things they shouldn't be doing, we would ask them. We had social sciences in our geyser basins and along the roads. Why'd you do that? Did you understand what they knew the rule? They knew the condition, but they made a calculation in their mind that the risk was worth it. That it was worth the risk to go look into that hot pool and get that picture that nobody else had, or to stand next to that bison and put your hand on its butt or on its head to get a picture that no one else had, because nothing was going to happen to them. I don't know what to do about that. I mean, I really don't. And if it was a matter of getting them information and they would follow or they would agree, I think that's one thing that's different than a callous disregard for the rules, regulations about what they should do. So I don't know how we can't handle that problem. And with a transient, every 1 or 2 days or 2 or 3 days, you have a total change in population. The fact that somebody fell into a hot pool and was boiled and nothing to recover, that doesn't even translate to the next week or probably 3 days later. So it's a tough problem. So thank you.